Thank you again for listening to Tape Noise Podcast. We're on the second episode of the Muscle Shoals Storyteller series. I'm Grant Walden.
I'm Dan Williams.
And we have with us hit songwriter, session musician extraordinaire,
Mark Narmore. Thank you, guys. Great to be here.
Oh, you don't have to lie to him.
Yes, he does. All right, so tell us a little bit of your history. Give us a little bit of a synopsis of what people know you as.
People know me as mainly songwriter / singer and then / keyboard player, I think. But as we go along and explore more about my history and kind of what I set out to be originally, that might be actually backwards. But yeah, people know me songwriter, singer, and keyboard player, mainly as a songwriter, though, I think.
What do you think of yourself as being? Whenever you think of Mark, what do you think of?
Really, all of those things are kind of equal, probably, and even like an artist, which I never really went for the major label artist deal, but it would be an artist, a singing artist, also a keyboard artist.
Sure, yeah.
I play guitar some too. So it's the artist on all those instruments. It's the songwriter, maybe even like an engineer, because I did a little of that early on.
I didn't know that.
And kind of had a flair and a thought. Actually, it's like a potpourri. Anything in the music business when I was young, I would have accepted any moniker of just
I'm
to be a
exactly
part
the same
of it.
way. I think most of us are.
Yeah, just to get some work. You take whatever you can get, and if it sticks, hey, you go with it.
Right.
Well,
yeah.
I'm a little curious about the engineering thing, because people have grown to know me as more of an engineer and producer, but really I started out musician. I mean, Dan, you can tell me.
We have some terrible recordings somewhere of us in his bedroom with a little single microphone hanging from a fan from when we were in high school.
He'd move the ceiling fan blade around, just position it just so. But yeah, I mean, so I've been a musician much longer than I've been an engineer, and I went to UNA, which Dan teaches at UNA, University of North Alabama. You graduated in the commercial music program.
1988.
88? Mm-hmm. I graduated in 08. So same program, but several years different.
Get with the program, Grant.
Right.
Oh, you are. Sorry, you're with the program.
But I got behind the glass. Yep, you pushed the button on Dan.
Yeah, it's going to be about an hour of me just cackling. Hell, that's it. The podcast.
That's all right. It's well worth your money.
Digging.
It's
We're all
free.
digging it.
In all seriousness, I got behind the glass and it was like a light bulb went off in my head. I was like, oh, well, this makes total sense why big artists, you may know of them as one thing, like an artist, but they venture into, let's say they own a studio, or they may start a publishing company, or they may own a studio and become an artist, or from one direction or the other. I found myself being able to be creative in a different way. I loved being able to produce and pull something out of an artist or a band that they may themselves not even know they have, and I might not either.
And you're
we
great
both
at
end
that.
up surprised.
You,
Well, I appreciate
you are
that.
really, really good at that.
I have a love for it. It's fun. It's exciting. I get to be an artist with the artist as the paint, I guess, if that makes any sense whatsoever.
In a cool Muscle Shoals way, Grant, Rick Hall was a lot like that too. And you are a lot like that in that you can push in just different ways. You can push people to play things that they probably wouldn't play, or sing in ways maybe that they wouldn't sing. And I think Rick did the same thing. He would try many different things and ways to get those sounds. I mean, you engineers, and Rick is, first and foremost, he was an engineer. He was a sound engineer
Right.
before, in the beginning,
Well, I mean, I kind of grew up on that, among many other things. I mean, growing up around listening to the grunge scene and everything that was happening in the 80s, 90s, and whatnot, regardless of style.
So that's neat. So that takes me back to the beginnings, and what I'm hearing from all three of us, I'm sounding like a counselor here.
No.
Now, what I'm hearing from you all is...
It's okay. Let me lay back on the couch.
So he made us fill out this whole personnel sheet before we started.
yeah, that's right. I'm hearing that we're all in the early stages. There's some love for recording and thinking we want to engineer and try to manipulate some kind of recording multi-track that other people can hear, and I definitely did. You guys may have done the same thing. I had a cassette tape recorder. I'd never heard of overdubbing. I thought, what if I get two of these little tape machines and then play the piano on one and then sing along with it while the other one is recording? So I started doing that and making rough cassettes at home. And
See, I did the same thing.
Right.
I didn't really know that was it either. I've been playing guitar and drums since I was like 7 years old. And I was always the guy, Dan can tell you, tweaking the knobs. Like it's got to go from here to there a millimeter. And if somebody moves it, I know immediately. Right. And they're like, no, I moved all your knobs back. And I'm like, no, you didn't. I hear the difference.
Right.
But I didn't realize that was kind of a quasi-engineering thing. But the album I go to is Michael Jackson's Dangerous. I wore that cassette tape out.
Man, that
and
was
I didn't
well-produced,
realize
that
album. Taking a tiny screwdriver like you would use on your eyeglasses to take it apart when the tape would go crazy. And I figured out, okay, maybe if I cut this at an angle, it's less noticeable. And I can tape the back side of the tape with some Scotch tape. And you might hear a little bump there, but it's not so bad. Or
so
you get a pencil.
You figured out on your own.
I didn't know that was
techniques.
A thing.
I guess so.
Yeah, I was a kid, and I was editing cassette tape and didn't know.
What did you use for a splicing block, though?
I didn't.
Oh, you didn't?
I mean, it may have been like the top of my amp or my stereo system.
And a piece of Scotch tape maybe to...
Yeah, I was just like, I have some scissors or, a razor blade. I didn't know. I was just trying to not have to buy another tape. I was trying to get the life out of it, quite frankly.
Right. There you
Michael Jackson didn't need any more of your money.
No, but that album...
That was bad.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, but when people hear it, they're going to think it's a real Thriller.
Oh! Or either one of you guys is a smooth criminal, and we better leave Michael alone.
Yeah, but
huge Michael fan.
Some of those sounds were really fat.
Oh,
that's just a Weird Al. I'm sorry. Yeah, we went from bad to fat, and okay, I'll stop now.
But it makes me think about in that era we're talking about when we all started. Analog was the deal, and the synthesizers, they had those big fat bass sounds. And
yeah, absolutely. Another thing I did, and I just realized. I was in a band. I'm trying to remember how old I was. I was in middle school, high school, or whatever. I don't know. I don't think you weren't in this band.
Yeah, I'm like 3 years younger.
I was playing drums at the time.
Is it Dawkin?
No. Just killed Dan. But no, we had this PA system that it was a cheap 4-channel PA that was like old in those days anyway.
Yeah.
And only 2 channels worked, I think. But we figured out that we had this little 4 or 8-track cassette multi-track recorders, like a Fostex, I think, or a Tascam or something.
Yeah.
You remember those?
Oh, I do.
I had one of those.
And yeah, I could maneuver mics around with a drum set, and we were using like little cheap Radio Shack mics at best. We had like one SM58 for a vocal mic, and that was the good mic. Lots of hit records have been recorded with that, but the other mics were like
karaoke mics.
No, karaoke mic is good in comparison to this. But they were like go to the Dollar Tree and hold the cable just right, set a book on it because it's got a short in it to keep it from moving. Kind of mics. Yeah. But I could plug them into the PA and route that stuff out, even though it wasn't coming out the speakers, so to speak. Right. Like the lead vocal would come through. But I would set a mic up kind of between the tom and the snare and above the kick drum. Would have like a room mic position just so, like we were talking earlier. I was multi-mic. I didn't know. I was just trying to get the most use of the crappy equipment we had and trying to capture all the sounds best I could. And I was running it out of the PA into the recorder and all these adapters. It was like the craziest.
And you were spot on.
Hazard.
I mean, you hadn't had a sound engineering course or read a textbook, but you were spot on with the way to do it.
Well, other than it was a massive fire hazard. I mean,
yeah, we plugged a strobe light into a Wurlitzer piano. I mean, wait a minute. They were all plugged into an extension cord.
Now you got me wondering what that sounds like.
Strobe light, Wurlitzer, and maybe an amp, PV amp, and we blew up my Wurlitzer that night.
No.
So,
I guess I shouldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, not to talk about me, but we have a lot of similarities.
Oh yeah, that's interesting to find out that we all, and you wound up a great engineer, but Dan, we all had engineering things when we first started that we wanted. We hear these hit records and we hear them on the radio and we're thinking, man, I would like to produce that. Maybe even myself here in my bedroom, maybe I could take some kind of crude equipment and it's fun. It's just, it's very
I've
fun.
got good equipment, Pro Tools rig and the whole thing, good outboard gear, 1176 compressor and all that good preamps and stuff like that. And I love great gear, but cheap gear, sometimes even crappy gear, has a built-in character to it that nothing else does.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Well, there's a whole movement right now in the indie rock scene centered around lo-fi. Intentionally going for that not high fidelity, kind of crackly, sort of thin in spaces sound.
I should have been a teenager now.
Yeah.
Because what I was doing in the bedroom would actually work and be accepted now.
Well, see, I kind of feel the
believe
exact opposite. I feel like, man, I should have been in high school in the 70s. I mean,
Wow.
that's just, so it's weird that.
Disco ball and the big board that was like 40 feet
Yeah.
long, mixing board.
Well, I mean, it's really cool.
And those are cool, though. I mean, they just
Oh, absolutely.
They are.
They're
It's really
unwieldy.
fascinating hearing how you went from one thing to another. Okay, man, let me restate that. It's not like you went from one thing to another. It's like you're doing all of these things, but one thing kind of sticks, and one thing is what people notice you for.
Right.
From my experience working with you in the sessions in the recording studio, we've been at several studios. We met, am I correct, at Wishbone?
At
Back in-
Wishbone.
that was
with
when I was
Mike-
interning with
Mike
Mike
and
McGuire.
Bird McGuire, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
My internship was from March through the summer of 2008.
Yeah, I was thinking it was the late 2000s.
That was one of those really cool things where they had a lot of jingles that they were working on, and I think you came in and sang on a lot of demos.
I did, and for the folks that don't know, Wishbone was a mainstay Muscle Shoals studio back in the 70s and early 80s. Wishbone was as happening as Fame or Muscle Shoals sound.
I was talking with Billy Lawson a few months ago that just recently acquired the place. Thank God he got it and it didn't turn into a dentist office.
Yeah.
Because I have a love for that place. That was where I really cut my teeth on that Neve console.
Pardon the dentist pun.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
If you hadn't said it, I was going to.
There you go. Oh, wow. That took me a minute. I totally didn't. Okay.
Dan and I are both in unison,
Yes.
thinking that.
And I totally
We're
did
just
not
going to team
intend
up
to do
on
that.
him. And
Okay, derailed. I didn't realize the opportunity that I had in front of me at the time. I just knew to seize it. I knew to be there. I treated it like a full-time job. I was there over 40 plus hours a week. I didn't realize until a few years later how rare it was for an intern to be in a demo session, for someone to actually ask your opinion and want you to respond.
Sure.
Instead of just cleaning the toilets and making coffee and answering the phone. I did all of those things, but I'm forever indebted and grateful to the guys that were down there. I obviously would not be doing what I'm doing if it weren't for that moment, those few months. The Wishbone thing, I talked with Billy, back to that conversation. Apparently, it was like the disco capital of the Shoals.
Yeah, man.
Like Bob Ray played bass on a ton of that stuff, and
Yeah, and speaking of disco, I remember actually going in the studio, like in, say, 1981, 82. I would have been in college, too, so I felt lucky and blessed to be able to even walk in this place. But speaking, the disco era was going on, and Wishbone was doing a lot of that funky kind of disco sound. But the actual studio itself, you guys, was dark. And I don't mean in like a evil kind of way. It was physically dark. There was no light. I mean, there
that's
was some
usually
like,
how it is in here.
yeah,
I'm
it is.
surprised you got the lights on.
You kind of
Yeah.
have a Wishbone groove, but most of the studios,
Maybe that's why.
it could be.
Yeah, there you go. Turn the light
Like
off.
some of the other studios I had,
Feels better.
that's nice. The studios I had been in the Shoals, were semi-dark, but you went to Wishbone and it was full tilt boogie, baby. It was like lights down, mood, just a little bit of a glow of some red and green and blue.
Yeah, exactly
amber
how
lights,
it is in
you
here.
know.
Lava
The only
lamps
thing you're
and
missing is
And you would have to feel at Wishbone along the wall to get
Oh, wow,
where you were
that
going,
dark.
almost that dark. Yeah.
only thing
Well, what
missing
do
is Barry
you-
White coming out of the speakers and maybe a
Right.
different kind of.
Well, yeah. uh-huh.
on that token, there's several other questions.
I didn't
wanna
see
ask
nobody
you.
token, but they probably were.
Well.
I'm sorry.
Wow.
Smell it before you see it type thing.
All right, on that token.
On that token, what do you think that contributes? The vibe, and that I have that sort of similarity, and it's very intentional. I hate fluorescent lights with a passion. They put me in a bad mood.
But they can cause migraines, yeah.
Well, there's been studies done and a lot of speculation. I don't know if there's any definitive proof on what illnesses they may or may not cause, but you are kind of burning mercury above your head. It can't be good, right? Sorry, light bulb companies. We won't be getting any endorsements from them.
We'll talk about the cliche "mad as a hatter," which goes along with
Well,
that. But
same
I'm-
kind of deal.
Yeah, 'cause it's treating the
I
hats
haven't even
with
thought
mercury.
about that, but that may, yeah.
The guys who dyed the hats back in the old days, the actual hat bands, they would somehow immersed in mercury. I don't know why.
I don't either.
But there was
yeah.
mercury in those hat bands, and the hatters would be like go crazy. They would
Right,
like go
exactly.
insane.
Yes.
Thus the cliche
Yeah.
mad as a hatter.
It gives me anxiety. And also, when you talk about your five senses, when one sense is reduced or completely gone, the others take over.
Well,
so
think about the shows we've seen on TV, you guys. I mean, when somebody is getting interrogated in a bad way, either they're prisoner
got the
of war,
single hanging light bulb.
they hang a light right in front. It's a stimulus. It's a super stimulus.
It is.
And though we do need the sunlight to help make our serotonin produce ample qualities and give us feel good feelings,
Right.
warm and fuzzy. I agree that in the studio, I think it contributes a lot. Sometimes the feel of the nighttime is more creative. It's a groovier time. It's maybe a more creative time. I know that's not always the case, but in the Muscle Shoals, I'm thinking Muscle Shoals 1978 and 80 when you're talking about Wishbone and the world in general, because disco was big. And I couldn't imagine anybody recording during the late 70s other than at night or overnight.
Yeah.
Well, see, before I ever got into the whole studio thing, my perception, looking at liner notes and all of that kind of stuff, when you would listen to a cassette tape back in those days, or a vinyl record, or I'm probably a weird anomaly that I'm 32, but I grew up on vinyl and 8-track and cassette tape. I also grew up on whatever was current at the time, but was listening to all the stuff from back in the day at the same time. I didn't discover it later. That was just norm for me. But I assumed and always had this curiosity of, what's a good way to describe this? There was a mystique element that I supposed would be in the studio. Like, there's this capturing of magic, and that
you're
is
right on.
true.
And you were
But
right
I
on.
always wondered, man, what was it like when Zeppelin was in the studio?
Oh,
what was
yeah.
it like when so-and-so was
Aretha was at Fame
exactly.
or things like that.
In today's
You build
society,
anticipation.
we're almost a little too exposed, and there's almost not enough mystery.
Right.
The mystery, to me, adds a huge element to the music, because lyrically speaking and musically speaking, there's this thing to me, especially if you're a young aspiring musician or songwriter or what have you, and if you're somebody like me who was accidentally becoming an engineer and producer and didn't even know it at the time, there's this thing that I think we're all drawn to in different ways, of we build up in our mind the scenario of how things happened. We imagine it was a certain way.
Exactly.
Whether or not that's true, it's valid.
Yes.
And I find that interesting that you talk about how there was this funky, groovy vibe
At Wishbone.
in the late 70s, early 80s in the Shoals, because Muscle Shoals is totally funky, has been from day one. Whenever day one is very debatable. Was it just Wishbone? Was it seeping into other studios? How do you see that now? Or do you?
In the day, like I say, 1980, 81 would have been the time frame. I came here to Cypress Moon, which was Muscle Shoals Sound 2 at the time.
Right.
This is a pretty funny story. I was about 14 or 15, and Spooner Oldham, my first cousin, he talked my mom into sort of letting me go to an overnight session over here. And, it's like, well, you watch that boy, you take good care of him.
Right.
Spooner's like, I will. So Spooner was overdubbing organ in Studio A, and so I was pretty much roaming around and into Studio B, and
Being a ninja
and
checking
to,
the place
To be
out.
honest with you, it was very dark and vibey too, which I loved. I thought, this is cool. This is what I expected it to be. A dark place with kind of cool vibey lights and just the
See, I
neatest
just
vibe.
assumed that's what it was.
That's the way it was here. Also at Cactus Studio in Sheffield, which Russ Zavitson had. Don Shrigley worked over there some. Ava Aldridge. It's the first session I played keyboards on, actually on a recording session. It was dark and vibey. To be honest with you, I can't, and I was at Fame after that. I can't remember if Fame was that dark and vibey. It's possible that it was kind of swinging toward the disco. Pardon the pun there. I didn't mean that at all. Freudian slips are all among us today here. I'm telling you. Most of the studios probably were physically dark and had the mood lights and lava lamps, with the exception of one, and it's the one that I kind of started out in Lexington, Alabama, in L.A., Alabama, Lexington. Oh. It was Woodrich, and good old Woody Richardson opened his door to interns, and he sort of got the offshoot business. If Fame was too busy, they would send some of the choirs and gospel groups and whatever, bands to Woody. And he was 30 or 40 minutes in Lexington. But that was a great education because he actually had good gear. He had some tube limiters and a good board. Nice. And things that I could learn some of the basics of recording, a good grand piano. But it was as bright as a church Sunday morning service, like, hallelujah. I mean, it was not dark there at all.
I think both of those elements have their place, too, because they do impart a feeling and a vibe. Like the other day, Saturday, I had a gospel session in here. It was a father and son, an older gentleman here, 73 years old. He just needed to be able to see better. Right. I mean, it just, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. And so I turned the lights on, and
totally different.
The mood lifts as opposed to how it's usually the opposite way.
Well, it feels a little bit better in here. We turned off the lights maybe 5 minutes ago, and it feels better in here now.
Dude. It's groovier. See, I just assumed it would be that way because of the video footage and photos I saw that went from a young age when I was looking at, the Rolling Stones and all these,
Well, just think
that's just what I thought it would be.
Right.
So I accidentally stumbled on a vibe that I guess is just me.
You did.
And I thought that's the way it would be, and I find it really surprising that people comment about it like, ooh, cool. I don't really see this often. That's a little odd to me because I just assumed you go in the studio, lighting matters.
And you're channeling 1978.
I'm in the wrong decade, I guess, but...
Well, hold on. Let me ask you real quick because you still do... I mean, you did a lot of work then. Probably you do more work now. Uh-huh. Do you still see that dark vibe in studios? Has that changed?
That's a good question. And I'm in Nashville quite a bit. I don't see as much of a vibe. I've seen it about the lights about halfway down. You know what I mean? It's not like a sterile, very bright, but they're turned down. But it's not cool and vibey like we're talking about. I don't think it's as dialed down. I think the lights are up about halfway in Muscle Shoals too.
Do you think that's changed the music?
That is a scientifically good, valid question to ask.
Yes. I will argue that that's an absolute yes. Have you guys ever been to RCA Studio B and toured?
Yes, I have.
Have you?
No.
Okay, you should go. I need to go again. It's pretty much just a tourist stop now, and Belmont owns it, and it's a great place for students to learn. Well, I think they still own it. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. Mm-hmm. I don't remember. Anyway, that's irrelevant. But they have this part of the tour where they love to talk about the different lights. Mm-hmm. Blue versus red versus green versus clear or yellow. Mm-hmm. And they would have producers that would come in, and I forget who it was. It was somebody that I think that was working with Elvis, actually, that they would change the mood of the lighting. Like red gives you energy, love, and if you Google search colors, how they affect the mind, there is a certain mood that they may have been going for. Maybe they wanted a more energetic song. Maybe it's a blues song, so they turn the blue lights up, right?
It's one of those things that we've known for a while, but we've only recently started to scientifically, sort of quantify. Because, blue lights, you've got a blue light filter on your phone. If you don't know that, you have a button that turns off the blue light.
Sleep and everything.
Yeah, right? It'll mess up your sleep patterns. But that's also, the reason a lot of newer vehicles have blue backlights in the stereo and on the dashboard and stuff like that is it helps keep you awake. And not only that, it helps keep you calm.
Yeah, there's a scientific proof that, like, if you go to a job interview, it's good to wear something maybe like a light blue because it's a calming, peaceful color.
Right.
That people feel more comfortable with you simply because of that. And this is totally off on a tangent from where I thought this interview was going to go, but this is what I love about podcasts and interviews.
Great.
Because I think you're 1,000% right that it had to affect
It had to have affected the music. You're exactly right. And some people hear in colors. I know it's rare, but some people hear music and they hear orange or red.
Exactly. I think that way too. So I guess that makes a lot of sense. Like I've done monitors doing live sound, and monitor world is a very interesting place to be at times because musicians don't communicate like regular people. We're artists. And I've had guitar players be like, man, my monitor sounds a little blue. I'm like, blue. Maybe it's muddy. I start reaching for some low mids in the EQ, and that's not what they mean. And I'm like, well, what do you mean exactly by blue? I'm searching for it, and I'm not making them happy. And what turns out is it's like, well, I need a little more bass. I'm like, that totally made no sense. But to them, it did.
To them, it did.
So you kind of have to put on the producer hat and be a little bit of a psychologist. What does this guy mean?
Since we're on the psychology level, and I love this, you guys have made me go way deeper than I thought I would go. But I've had a thought. You're talking about calming, and you do turn the lights down, and you do get meditative. Of course, naturally, when people go to sleep, you turn the lights down. And many people, right before sleep, you sort of get in either a prayerful or a meditative place, and that's sort of a spiritual place. It's a calm place where you can your thoughts kind of get defragmented. And so what if you were to get people on a psychiatrist's couch, get the lights down, put a mic in front of them, make them sing or do things musically or write songs when they're closer to that when they're almost about to go to sleep? Wonder what that would do.
I've heard some really good performances from people that are extraordinarily talented, but you cannot get a performance out of them unless it's after 2 o'clock in the morning and unless they're tired. You will get them in this state of mind where they will give you an amazing performance that if you tried it a few hours before, it would have sounded like a cat,
Well, that
with
reminds me
ringer.
of Butch Vig recording, I think it was the Nevermind album, Underneath the Bridge. Was that on there or on In Utero for Nirvana?
I feel like it was, oh man.
Maybe Bleach. I don't remember what album it was. But either way, there's an interview on YouTube with him talking about recording Kurt Cobain laying on his back on a couch playing the acoustic guitar. He may have been laying on the floor. Either way, he was laying on his back, and he just put the mic over him, and that's why it's like, And they had tried tracking it before, like a normal session, and it didn't work. And that did. And I've heard stories of Rick Rubin, an excellent producer that's worked with everybody from Slayer to Johnny Cash to the Beastie Boys.
You're talking about Something in the Way.
Something in the Way.
Yeah, that was...
I got the title of the song wrong. My bad.
I feel better now. I was losing my mind over here.
Underneath
I don't
the
know
Bridge,
that.
was that's the line that sticks out in my head.
I think it's the opening line.
Yeah. But anyway, Rick Rubin will lay back on the couch and just listen while they're doing stuff, and he might have a mic and he'll say something, and then he's just chilling back on the couch while he's producing.
That sounds like you're definitely onto something there with that idea of getting people in that peaceful meditative state and then getting a different performance out of them.
And like you said, Grant, either record them kind of in that, or what if you put a stimulus on them at that point, like threw a bucket of water on their head and sing
I have done
right
similar
now.
things, actually. I had a guy that was very much a crooner in the early days of recording where I was trying every little trick I could find. I avoided recording karaoke stuff like the plague. But when I had my studio in downtown Decatur, a guy next door to me, Gary McKenzie, had a vocal
He did vocal
studio.
coaching, right?
Yeah, he was an excellent vocal coach. And he had this one guy, very much a Johnny Mathis, Frank Sinatra, crooner type. And he was just thinking about the vocal too much. So I had this drum sitting in the floor. I just handed it to him randomly and didn't say anything. I was like, here, hold this, and pushed record and said, okay, sing. He just had this weird look on his face. I wish I had a picture of it, and he nailed it.
He's probably afraid of what you were going to make him hold next.
Well, there may But what I did is I handed him this drum, and he just nailed the vocal. It was just because it kind of threw him enough that he was not thinking about singing.
That's really
enough.
interesting. I wonder if that would work, say, if you handed them like a spatula or like a blowtorch, not lit, but here, it kind of throws you like a laundry basket, empty. Hand them something to make them sing differently.
He's the engineer and the producer. Maybe he knows something I don't know, and you hand him something. Wow, Daniel. So it's an hour-long episode of Daniel cackling.
That's what's going to be.
I love it, man.
We warned you first.
I love it.
But yeah, I mean, I've done things like that, and it's worked every time.
Hand them the head of an antelope. I mean,
I handed a woman her purse. I was like, "Here, hold this."
it's
And
your
it was
own
like-
purse, but here.
well, here's the thing. Usually, a woman's purse is pretty heavy because it got everything in it. I took some vocal lessons when I was in college. And this lady from New York came down for a master class and had us go up to the grand piano and try to lift it up. Well, what that did was force your diaphragm to work. So if you're holding something, your diaphragm is automatically working properly because you have to use those muscles to hold something, and they are not having to concentrate on it. It's just naturally happening.
You know, I guess you couldn't do this to a singer, or you could, but it would be kind of counterproductive. My horn teacher in high school, my first trumpet lesson teacher, would go get paper towels and wad them up and just shove them into the bell so you couldn't get air through it. So to get air through it, you had to really tighten up the diaphragm and push. So I guess if you were to shove paper towels in a singer's mouth, it probably wouldn't do the
That's
same.
probably what happened to Dizzy Gillespie, because he had that weird, his cheeks would puff out, remember?
Yeah.
And that was an erroneous way to play, but it worked for him, right?
Sounds good.
Right.
A lot of the techniques they tell you to do are so counterproductive to the old great trumpet players. I mean, it worked for them. They were doing something right.
They sure were.
That might have been in spite of that, but they were doing something right.
Okay, so let's go back to the songwriting. Tell me, how did you come about being a songwriter? When was the point that you realized, hey, I'm a songwriter?
That's a great question. Since people do pretty much perceive me as songwriter first, like numero uno, Mark Narmore is songwriter and I am, but originally the songwriting came a little later than people might have suspected, or the thought that I wanted to be a songwriter. It takes me back to those late 70s days. Those were crucial, formative times for me, teenage years. And Wishbone, really, a lot of the bands that were recording at Wishbone were bands that I was in love with their music. FCC, Funky Communication Committee.
Oh, yeah.
My gosh, there are 3 albums they cut there. I knew every inch of the album back. And I was always, like you, Grant, an avid album back reader, credit reader. I thought at that point, if I could get my name, I didn't care whether it was assistant engineer, bass player. My thought was, I've just got to be on an album.
That was exactly
back.
my
I
deal.
want a credit. So early on, of course, I was playing some piano from age 5 to 15, but really it took that long for me to get good. So
Did you take lessons, or did you?
I did, and they would kick me out because I was playing by ear, and kind of
Absolutely.
mimicking what they get them to play it, and I would pretend to play the music and was playing it by ear.
But it seems like that's a more use. I'm going to anger some people when I say this. Well, I was going to say, as somebody that learned to read sheet music and did not learn to play by ear until I was in my early 20s.
Right.
Good Lord, that's more useful in actual music,
Well, I think what it boils down to is not necessarily that it's more useful. I'm going to kind of agree and disagree with you at the same time. There are people that are incredible musicians that they can't make up a single thing. They're not idea people.
But they're good players.
But they're very good communicators of someone else's idea. And that's not always true with a musician, because a lot of times a song may be perfectly written and me trying to interpret it and put my own stamp on it might in fact mess it up. So there is an element of that. But what you're saying, I agree with, where you throw somebody in a situation, whether it be in the studio, on stage, or in a songwriting session, whatever, people with ideas. I mean, you put 2 or 3 people in the room together. I've been in writing sessions with you, actually. Me, you, and Rusty Moody. We were writing a song, a year and a half ago in here, and there was 2 of us that were just kind of stuck. And I think Rusty was over there just kind of like penciling out, hey, I've got this thing. And inevitably, one of you is going to have a good idea. I think that kind of correlates with writing, with playing music, whatever.
Let me ask you, you write a lot of songs. Do you have a personal favorite that just hasn't seen the light of day, or hasn't seen the light of day yet? Do you have one that you really think has kind of fallen by the wayside, that deserves a little bit more love than what it's seen?
There are always, in different eras, probably during the 80s when I was writing, there were some then that didn't get cut. There were probably some in the 90s. So I have probably a handful of 10 or 12, but I do have one recently that I wrote in the last few years that I can remember, and it's called There's a Woman in Your Room. And it just came to me, and it's like one of those that probably took me a week or so to write it. Wrote it by myself. I've written a lot of songs by myself, which is my rare pleasure. I love to write by myself, and I encourage people to do more of that. I've always written by myself. Co-writing is a thing I had to learn. The Woman in Your Room was a thing. I saw my daughter sitting on her bed, and she's always been, my little girl. I walked by one day, and there's a woman sitting in there in that room, and it was such a sad moment. I mean, I had to write that song. But it's never been recorded.
I have got to hear that.
Surprising,
I have got to hear that song. You have got to record it. That is.
I'll have to email you guys a copy
That's
of it.
a
Or
hit.
text it. I'm learning all these, There's probably some kind of mental telepathic way we can send it now, really. I'll telepath it to you guys later.
Just thinking about tinfoil hats and everything else right now.
That goes well with the
Jiffy
Polybius
Pop.
podcast, right?
Jiffy Pop popcorn, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask a series of questions.
Sure.
And I want to talk a little more about the songwriting, because you and I have written together, and the first time me and Haley wrote was in Studio B down here, and our whole intention was, as long as we don't write something that sounds like this, we'll be happy. Well, we wrote something that sounded just like what we did not want to do, but it was great, and we loved it, and we had a lot of fun.
Right.
Writing with you is very similar to working with you in the studio. You are full of ideas. I love that with you, because that is a rare quality in someone that is a great songwriter, a great singer, and a great musician. A lot of those guys don't really have their own ideas. So that is a 4 or 5 threat there.
I like this. Keep talking there.
I mean, I'm really
love
not
it.
trying to stroke your ego and pander you. I'm
I know.
actually really serious in saying that. You're one of the funnest people that I've worked with, because the mood that you bring with you, whether it be a writing session or a recording session, or just even like today coming in.
Just hanging and
it's a
jamming.
hang. And I find that that's what allured me the most to music in general, or the studio.
Yeah.
It's kind of like being in your buddy's basement
It's
playing
pure-
music at
It's pure
15
D
years
hanging
old.
out. And Donnie Fritz said that early
Yeah.
on. He said the studio and music and muscle shows was pure D hanging out.
Yeah,
That's what it
and there's
was.
an element of a spiritual connection there, not to get too metaphysical, but
It goes back to
the
those lights being
energies.
down earlier.
The lights
Exactly.
being down into that meditative place. But
Exactly.
that's cool that you pointed out, and I appreciate that, because sometimes you don't see things you do, but like the going out on a tangent, and I've always been that way. I've always been like stream of consciousness. And I do believe...
You play that way too, not
I
to
sort of-
interrupt you,
yeah.
but you and Spooner have that very much a similarity in your playing, in that I love recording analog, and I know Spooner loves recording analog because that's the way he's done, but Pro Tools is amazing. Digital recording is amazing for guys like y'all, because you may do one thing and then you may not do it again. Spooner especially. He may not even remember what he did,
It's like
but there
stream of
was this
consciousness,
5-second
right.
moment that was just like the stars aligned and magic just happened. And that may be the only thing that needs to be played in that entire song on the keyboard.
Right.
If you didn't have that digital way of capturing that, it's rather difficult on tape. There's moments that you guys capture because you have that stream of consciousness and the ability and the confidence to go with it. The band follows. The singer follows.
That's it. Sometimes it's confidence. Sometimes I don't even know if it's confidence. It's almost like stripping, don't want to say stripping down naked, but it's like bearing your soul. You just have to be free and just, you don't care. I'm going to say and let my brain, my spirit, whatever is generating these ideas. And it's fun. I mean, I feel like I'm on top of the world, like a high, like a buzz when that's happening. And it.
One of the times we've left the session or a writing session or recording or whatever, it's like, man, that was great. I'm so glad.
And it
we
has
did
to
this
get
today.
stoked. Some of it is sort of like in volleying, like we're doing here earlier, like we're throwing jokes around. Some of it gets started in that like a quantum way. It's like a bounce, and things are showing up over here. It has to get stoked and poked. That
Exactly.
thing in me to make it start going, get the motor running. But once it's going, I tell you guys, and this happens to me when I play a lot, it may happen with you. I lose a time perception. Sometimes I'll be sitting there, and when I sort of wake up, they're sweeping the floor and putting chairs up on the tables, and I'm like, what happened? I thought I was playing, and I was so
It's
involved.
like some sort of space-time continuum where you just are in your own world.
I was in it, and I didn't realize time at all. Almost didn't even recognize the situation or the physical properties, but I was so into it that I didn't know when it ended.
And that
Those are the good
translates
ones.
through the speakers, that translates
good.
from the stage to the audience. I fully believe that what we love so much about music as an art form, and I believe it's like the ultimate art form, is it contains so much of our spiritual selves and the connectedness that we all have. Have you ever been in a moment at a concert and you just look across and you and some random person you don't know, you will never see again, connect eyes, and you're like sharing a moment, and it's like, yeah, that guy just wailed on that guitar solo. Yeah, they played the notes, but there was something going on more than just the notes. I think that's why we love shows. Guys like us, we thrive on the studio moments. We hope and pray we capture that on tape.
And we want to be on that stage playing
We
that
wanna-
Eddie
yes.
Van Halen guitar, man. We do.
I mean, you can say sometimes more with one note than you can ever say with 100. But there's that moment, and everybody gets it, but no one can fully explain it.
Exactly. The Grateful Dead, their performance philosophy, and Donna Jean will probably tell you this too, but my publisher, Hal Evans, saw them a number of different times through the 60s and 70s. He said there were a couple of times where they just clicked. He said he saw the Dead when it sounded like six people were playing different things and it was a train wreck, but there were a few times they came together in such harmony, symphony, and cacophony. Is cacophony good or bad? If it's good, I'll keep it in
Sure,
there
why
and
not?
say it.
We'll say it's good for right now.
We'll say it's good that it was just so on and magical and beautiful. But that's sort of a random thing, like you're saying. If I come in and play you all kind of different crazy wild things from my head, you might get zero zilch. But if I give you enough, if I keep giving and giving and giving, somewhere in there is going to be like a little brilliant piece.
Well, and I think that's you open something up of yourself. You're giving something of yourself.
Right.
And I think the whole concept of the jam band scene, which I love, and a lot of people judge it, but the fans understand this. That's why people travel across the East Coast and drive hundreds of miles on a bicycle to go see somebody play, and there's 80-something thousand people at a concert. Yet the mainstream people have no concept of who it even is sometimes. There's a sense of community. I believe it's the same reason why social media is a big thing. People are searching for community. There's a connectedness. The music being loose, like the Grateful Dead and a lot of those guys, it's opening themselves up enough to allow those moments to happen. Because if you were so micro-structured, you may not ever see those moments
It's like a
happen.
watch pot
happy
never boils. And it's
Right.
almost like the quantum particles. They've proven this, that some of those small particles, if they're watched, they will act differently. Like you split
Right.
the quantum light. Photons is what it is. And if you watch them, they will act and react in a quantum way. They will settle down, and if you're not watching, they don't do anything.
Wow, that's interesting. Let me ask you another question.
Mr. Science here.
Hey, I'm enjoying it.
Yeah, this
Songwriting,
it's
huh?
fascinating. Take us through your process of songwriting.
It's always been, and you guys hit the nerve right on the head. That's using a lot of mixed metaphors there, but I've always been a stream of consciousness thinker. I like thinking crazy, wild things like purple, blue porpoises, jumping onto becoming a Stratocaster and flying off to Venus. I've always thought that way. So that has always been where I get my ideas from. I've always started with lyrical ideas.
Do you start with a title? Do you start with an idea? Do you just
Always a title.
or is it a little different? It's always a title?
And you know why that was? Because when I got into songwriting, I was in country radio. And
Makes sense.
I did not grow up liking country music. I grew up listening to James Taylor, who really is
Now
a
you
little
make
bit
more
country.
sense to me.
The Eagles and
Yeah.
even hard rock bands like Led Zepp and Kiss. So I didn't understand country and country lyrics. So I wasn't a writer up until like 1983, a professional writer, or 84. So at that time I was doing country radio, and I was thinking, how am I going to play these country records? I don't even like George Jones.
You're talking about back when you were a DJ.
When I was first a DJ, I thought, and you know what? It was like a religious experience, because once I heard Jones sing and saw what a soulful singer he was,
Right.
it was a total flip for me. And I was hearing the double entendre of the country songwriting, which I thought was kind of a bass kind of a lower, kind of a very simplistic form of music. What I was hearing at the radio station was this was brilliance, these double twists, triple twists. The poetry and imagery was just so dynamic. So it was like a religious experience for me. So I became hooked, pardon the pun, on songwriting via hearing some Muscle Shoals songs, but a lot of Nashville songwriters of the day.
So how do you feel that you became being known as a hit country songwriter? I mean, you have written some of the most iconic country songs.
Country songs are mostly about the title. If you have that seed, that germ, which doesn't always and hasn't always happened in pop and rock, you have to have a strong title that is almost the matrix and the map of your song within itself. It's almost like the DNA is contained within that title. That's the key for me. If I find a great song title idea, well, it's going to tell me how to write it within the parameters of myself. You could write it a few different ways and they all would be good, but it's going to tell you pretty much how to write it.
Have you ever written a song that you're just like, man, this song just doesn't have anything to it, and you get up the nerve to let somebody hear it, and everybody just gravitates toward it and loves it?
Right. I've had a song like that once that I thought there was nothing to it, and then I heard it on the radio, and you know what? There still was nothing to it.
Do you mind telling us what it was?
Oh, gosh. I better not, because
Okay.
it might incriminate.
Yeah.
Let's not do that.
Well,
Let's
no,
not do
it would
that.
incriminate a couple of other songwriters, but we had fun writing it. And we were all saying this. We're going like, this will never get cut. And I promise you it got cut and was a single on the radio. And I can't say what it was. It wasn't a
Say
big
no.
hit, though. It wasn't a hit.
But I mean, no, but the fact that it was recorded and it was out there and it was a single means, it was probably like the 0.1% of songs out there.
That's right.
Right. So somebody obviously gravitated toward it.
And it had to
yeah.
speak to somebody.
That's
Exactly.
right.
So it has its place in the world and the music ether.
Yeah, and I like this analysis of self y'all are doing about the songwriting, because I'm thinking, okay, I always have the title, and the title's kind of going to shine out that little, like I say, matrix or a framework that's going to say, write me this way. The title is
they
doing
grow
the
their own
talking.
life. It's a living, breathing
It's
thing.
like a living, breathing thing. Well, when I went to Fame and Rick Hall and Walt Aldridge, Robert Byrne, all these great writers were there, and Mike McGuire, I saw their process they were doing when it finally came to putting the song together. They were doing a lot of rewriting, and I'm thinking, that is really interesting. And it goes to what you're saying. When you give a great output of a lot of different lines and musical things, tons and tons and tons. It's like putting a puzzle together. You have to have pieces to, this would fit better. Well, let me try 14 other lines.
You
This
slept
one
on it.
fits better. Yeah.
You come back to it the next day.
So
or a
I
couple weeks
learned to
later.
rewrite, and I learned to rewrite so good that some songs I would have a stack of 14 Lego pads on one song. I almost took it at one point to such an OCD that I almost quit songwriting, to be honest with you guys. In the mid-'90s, I almost train wrecked mentally.
You can become a perfectionist to the point, and it's like no one can hear the difference.
And Walt Aldridge was a savior of my thoughts and my career at that point. He said, Mark, you're a great lyric writer, but he said, man, you'll never get things like 110% like you want them. He said, try this, because he knew I was kind of going down the path of quitting, sort of. He said, lower. Why don't you lower the bar? Also, think as a producer and write a record. I was a lyric writer, and I was like a Bob Dylan. I was writing lyrics, almost like the music didn't matter that much at the time in country music. But he said, Mark, if you'll start writing records and thinking you're writing a record as you're writing the song,
that's interesting.
And lower that lyrical bar back about to 85%.
Do you find that helps you if you think with a record in mind, not necessarily for yourself, but songs that go well together? Do you find that doing that helps you write maybe 8 or 10 more songs with a similar kind of direction?
Sure it does.
Like if you have an artist in mind that you might want to pitch a song to, do you find yourself writing a handful of songs that same artist would like as well?
Oh, if I'm clued in and are friends and have an in with an artist, you better believe any songwriter would be probably crazy not to at least try to target that and write 3 or 4 or 5 songs that just target that right. Hit them right down the gut.
That's the idea of knowing your audience.
Exactly.
If you know them well enough to know what they like, what they might want to do, then I guess to be purely pragmatic and to talk about how the sausage is made just a little bit. You as a songwriter, you're trying to get that song out there. You got to make a living.
Right. You're right. You do, and you have a toolbox like y'all were talking about. Having that toolbox has kept me in the game longer than a lot
What's
of
in your toolbox?
peers my same age. The toolbox has got everything from childhood up until today. And in there is punk rock. There is James Taylor. There's George Jones. There's Southern gospel. There is cadences of like hip hop. And in my toolbox is things that I can do like Bobby McFerrin, where I can emulate drum loops. People like my crazy. I think that's what's kept me in the game. The looseness, the crazy, and being able. The toolbox is full of things I can pull out.
Well, a lot of we were talking. This was probably a year or two ago. You were telling me how you were listening to Eminem.
Oh, yeah.
And for his wordplay kind of ideas.
What do you think about his new album?
I haven't heard the new one.
Okay, well, let me get back to me when you do. I want to know your thoughts on it.
I need to listen to it. I haven't.
I will check it out.
I've had strange stares, but I would equate the way you write and the way Eminem writes and the way Eric Church writes and similar artists. I've compared Eric Church and Eminem multiple times and get some blank stares, but the way they play with words
it's clever.
It's very, clever. Very similar. Like, I'm having a record year. That's clever.
That's one of those titles that's clever, and it tells you exactly how to write it. It's a record year.
Do you think that's a key to writing a good country song? The title tells you what you need to know up front. You know what you're getting into. You're not necessarily going to get any bad surprises. If you're in a certain mood and you want to listen to this song, you look at the title, you go, okay, well, I kind of know what I'm in for.
Probably subliminally, even people that aren't songwriters probably know, And this is the funny thing about country songs and the double entendres and the twist. Well, after you hear it one time, the cat is out of the bag, so to speak. People love to come back and hear that again and again.
That's where the wordplay is funny. The song unfolds every time you hear it.
Every time.
And it becomes more of a part of who you are as an individual and part of your life, your childhood. I mean, who among us can think of our generations not having heard the Beatles? I mean, it just exists. It's one of those things that's part of our culture.
It's so ubiquitous that you can't get away from it.
Right, exactly.
And it's like, I'm blessed to be at 53 years old, still doing it and having a publishing deal. But I do like, and Rick Hall always listened to things much younger than him. And I know you guys do too. Rick would like Maroon 5. I'm listening to Bruno Mars last week just to write a country song now to get inspired. And I've always, I think people have always listened to other things a little more out there than country to write country songs.
Well, we were kind of talking about that before we started. It seems like whatever pop music is inevitably bleeds over into country. And there's nothing wrong with that.
That's
there's nothing
true.
wrong with that.
Essentially, country is now, it's got so many elements of pop, hip-hop, southern rock. I mean, if you go listen to my two favorite records by the Rolling Stones, Let It Bleed and Beggar's Banquet, you've essentially got modern country.
Well,
that's true.
The Rolling Stones
Keith Richards is really a country
Exactly.
player.
You don't get any more rock and roll than the Rolling Stones. They define rock and roll.
Well, and I couldn't tell you what it is right off the top of my head. I looked it up and I forgot what it was called, but it's been a couple of weeks ago now. I heard a country song it's come out in the past few months, but I truly believe you could have taken that song, slipped it into a 90s alternative playlist, and no one would have been any the wiser, because it was
Absolutely.
completely.
Well, all the people that are doing it, we grew up on that stuff.
Oh yeah, Darius Rucker is.
Absolutely.
He's letting
Which
her-
goes to prove its music really has a universality
Absolutely.
to it.
That's the beautiful thing about
Because
it
we're
to
talking
me.
about George Jones, people think, man, he is a country dude. He is one of the most soulful singers that ever lived.
Absolutely.
So it's really all universal.
We need to kind of close and wrap this up.
It's been fun, dudes.
Absolutely, man. Thank you.
Oh,
Mark,
yeah,
for
thank you
coming
for
again.
coming.
Anytime. This is good therapy. And, where can you go and get psychoanalysis and then trying to psychoanalyze things about your songwriting? It's beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we close it up, I got one thing I have to say. I just had to look up and see who actually said it. It's what we were just talking about. There was an interview with Louis Armstrong, and he said there's two kinds of music, good and bad.
Was that Louis Armstrong?
That was Louis
I thought
Armstrong.
it was Miles Davis. He
Well,
probably repeated Louis.
maybe. Google may have lied to me. But yeah, it said he didn't care about, it wasn't rock and roll, rhythm and blues. It wasn't any of that. It was music. And
And I don't agree with him necessarily because I think all music is good. Even hitting on a stool or knocking a stool over, I think it's all good.
there's music in everything.
I believe that. I believe it is.
And if nothing else, it leads to good music. Even if it's not in and of itself, it leads somewhere. It's kind of like you talking about playing and then eventually something happens.
Right.
It may just be kind of some noise that you're opening yourself up and then something beautiful happens.
Right.
When you let yourself go just enough. I think it was Michael Jackson that said something like, the songs are out there. We just have to be ready to receive them.
Right, and I do think, Dan, I didn't mean to dispute that.
No,
I think
no.
I think a lot of people are good and bad, but I've always liked everything. Like I said, punk rock, Southern gospel. It's just kind of a blessing and a curse. And I'm thinking, does everybody doesn't like everything, but I like
Yeah, I'm right there
all
with you.
music.
Well, okay, so your hit songs. You're known for Moon Over Georgia with Shenandoah, incredible song.
Thank you.
You're also known for What I Love About Sunday, Craig Morgan. Both of those great, incredible songs, hits. In my opinion, I would say songs kind of like you were talking about George Jones, He Stopped Loving Her Today. I would equate those in that level.
Well, thanks,
Where,
man.
in my
Thanks.
opinion, those are songs for a songwriter to study how to write a song.
thanks, man.
Whether or not you despise country music, love it, hate it, indifferent, whatever, those are songs to study, to learn the craft.
Well, thanks.
I mean, you told me before that it took you a long time to write Moon Over Georgia, that Rick just
Yeah, it
was hard on you on that one. It would not let you.
Yeah, I was a young writer, and I was like, that's one of the ones I stacked up the 14 legal pads
Yeah,
on.
he wouldn't
and
let you settle.
Rewriting. And it's funny, being a new lyric writer in country music, at the time, country music was so lyrical. It was all mostly about the lyric. I mean,
Yeah.
the music could be 1-4-5. But as I rewrote Moon Over Georgia, the lines got shorter. The verses got simpler, and that was the most shocking thing because I was trying to be the most clever, the most trying to twist things three ways kind of guy. But the more I wrote on it,
The sign of a true pro and artist
Mm-hmm.
is when you can be simple.
and still pull off that universality,
Oh, yeah. and it be unique,
Right.
and still have a touch of paprika or whatever. It has a little
Right.
touch of a little out there left
That's
field.
right. And you're right, Grant. Rick was pushing buttons, but it was all for my good.
Yeah.
He knew that maybe I had some of that spark in me. And
He saw something you didn't see, apparently.
that I didn't see. And when I thought I had arrived at a good version of Moon Over Georgia, he might, bombard that and say, man, Mark, you really need to start from scratch on those verses. And
Wow.
that's pretty hard to hear sometimes when you think
but the
somebody
proof's in the pudding, man.
start from scratch. And,
I mean, you.
and I started
you
from
nailed that
scratch,
one.
and I did on that one. I did want to impress Rick. He was the godfather and always has been of Muscle Shoals music. I mean, he was like a
good
godfather. I mean, and being there 11 years was just a blessing for me to have been there. It was kind of funny. I always thought about Rick in those meetings. He would have all us writers and some of the musicians, mainly writers, and you didn't ask to go to the bathroom in a Rick Hall meeting. I don't care. You almost didn't speak unless spoken to, really. But it was he commanded that much respect. We sat there. If you had to go to the restroom, you waited 3 or 4 hours, and sometimes the meetings would last 7 or 8 hours.
Wow.
That's ADD hell.
Yeah, I know, right? Can you give our listeners who may be aspiring musicians, songwriters, what have you, some advice? I mean, what would you say to someone who's, say, 20 years old and going through that same sort of thing? Maybe they're at that point where they've got that stack of 14 different versions of the same song and they're about ready to just hang it up.
Probably get, if you can get like to Muscle Shoals or Nashville, get with a publisher or some other people a little bit older than themselves.
So seek out mentors?
Seek out mentors 10 years, 20 years older than you. You don't have to take your mentor's full advice, as you guys know, but sometimes there's a grain of truth in what a mentor could teach you, especially in trying to keep you from giving it up. Maybe they should give it up, but maybe the mentor will guide them toward that, but maybe they shouldn't. And there's no shame in
there may be something else. Maybe they're not that great of a writer, but maybe they're an excellent producer.
Everything is valid, every profession in this world. You know,
that's some hard advice, but it's good
advice. It's hard advice, but it's
advice.
Advice that's much needed. Okay, so who were some of your mentors? Obviously, Rick Hall.
Yeah.
And Walt Aldridge.
Yes.
Robert Byrne.
Robert Byrne was definitely
Spooner,
a mentor.
I guess.
Spooner Oldham early on. Woody Richardson that I mentioned earlier, he was very much a mentor. And he had the studio in Lexington, Alabama, which was open for people like me, youngsters who were interested, to interns. And also I met Milton Sledge there, who became a Garth G-man, and his buddy, I'm trying to think who passed away, Mike Chapman. They were playing at Woodrich, and so it was Ava Aldridge was a huge mentor for me. She got me in the studio playing piano, sort of believed in me when I didn't believe in myself.
That's an amazing thing when somebody believes in you, maybe even more than you believe in yourself.
Right, and Ava was definitely that for me. And then when I went to Fame, of course, Rick was, Walt and Robert. We all looked up to those guys so much, and we tried to emulate almost everything they did. Marty Rabin and Mike McGuire, the guys in Shenandoah, were mentors for me big time. Jim Seals, yeah.
Thank you, first of all.
Yeah, thank you.
This has been awesome.
It's been a good interview. I feel like it's been a good interview.
I've been able to pick your brain.
I like the scientific part, and I wanted to ask you guys if you've heard anything before you wrap it up there. This one guy has come out with a theory recently that our perception of reality comes from there are some quantum particles in the microtubules of your brain. I mean, this is like molecular level, that they act on a quantum level, that he's saying that perception, our feeling that we are what we are, you feel like a person.
Right.
He's saying that feeling evolves from quantum particles in the microtubules,
our consciousness
in your brain.
Yeah.
Is there any? What do you guys think about that?
In all honesty, my brain.
I try not to, because the terrifying thing about that is whenever you stop and think about it, it means that everything you see, everything you think, everything you feel is just chemicals in your brain, and it's no different than the chemicals in a vial somewhere, and it's. Maybe it's true, but it's really dehumanizing.
Oh, that's pretty vile. The vial.
I've been studying a lot about a metaphysical type of energies, and everything is energy, from a rock to us as humans to the air we breathe and lights, and everything has its energy and an intensity and a certain speed at which it vibrates, and sound, music.
String theory would sort of be up.
It's sort
talking
of in the
about
same
quantum things. Yeah.
Wow, this interview went an interesting direction. That is awesome. I love this. But honestly, it's one of those.
When's the last time somebody interviewed you about your ideas on scientific matters?
Exactly. Okay.
But don't you want to do things nobody else would? So yeah.
Bill Nye is going to show up any minute now and slap us around.
Bill. Oh.
Yeah. All right. So. Wrapping this up again, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. A pleasure.
One last question I want to ask you. What is something you are the most excited about right now that you would love to share with people?
originally wanted to be an artist way back in the early 20s, but I never really approached that.
In the 1920s?
Well, yeah, the 1920s. But I'm actually playing a lot more now. People might not know that. I'm performing live and playing that piano and telling stories about the songs. I'm playing different places from, gigs here and there, Atlanta and Nashville, Birmingham, just here and there. But I'm doing a lot of that playing. Also, Grant, as you know, we've worked a lot together. Actually, my first dream was to be a session player in the studio, so I'm getting finally to play on a few sessions here and there, in Shoals mainly, some in Nashville, some in other places, but people are recognizing me as a keyboard talent, which I sort of didn't get out there and proclaim it and declare it because I was a songwriter. I had a hat. Sometimes you get a hat put on you and, okay, you're a songwriter. But I was also a keyboard guy all along, and finally I'm getting to play that little scenario. It's fun. It's really fun.
Oh, and
oh my goodness,
absolutely.
It's fun. But before we go, could I ask another scientific
let's
question?
Keep going.
Yeah.
We're just keeping on going. I'm trying
here.
to wrap this up, but it's going science.
Now we're talking about string theory. This is all just theoretical physics, right? Quantum and theoretical physics,
Sure.
basically.
The stuff you can show mathematically, but you can't.
Right.
You can't touch it, feel
Gravity
it.
is the weakest force in our world. I mean,
Sure,
it's
yeah.
the natural forces. Some people come up with these theories that our frame here, our world, is bumping into some other world, grabbing its gravity. I know that's kind of almost sounded like a
No, I read about
song
this
title.
last week.
We're borrowing gravity because we're bumped into another little.
Yeah, it's a weak force
Reality.
because it doesn't really exist here. We're borrowing it from
Well, it's
from
sort of
another.
like
What do you think, Grant?
It's sort of like the moon borrows gravity from the Earth, and the Earth borrows gravity from the moon and the sun, and it's all.
It's
they're
kinda
all-
like
they're
the
all
hit-
pulling and pushing.
It's like
each
the ankle
other.
bone
Talking about
connected
tidal
to
forces
the
is what you're
foot
talking
about. Yeah,
bone,
absolutely.
foot bones connected to the knee bone, knee
Everything's-
bone connected to the hip bone, hip bone.
Everybody now, join in.
We got a surprise performance. There we go.
Thank you for your science, guys. I love science.
That's
I really
fascinating.
Well, it's
do. I
everything.
do.
All right, thank you. You're listening to the Muscle Shoals Storyteller series of a Tape Noise podcast. Thank you again to Mark Narmore for taking time out of his busy schedule to sit down with us and let us interview him and ask him a few questions. That was definitely an interview that none of us wanted to see end. Mark, as you can tell, is a very interesting guy. He is full of talent in many ways, great songwriter and great musician, just a great guy to sit down and talk with. Be sure to check us out on all the digital platforms, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, SoundCloud, etc. You can follow us on all the social media platforms as well, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Tell your friends. Drop us a review or a comment. We would very much like to hear from you. We need feedback. Let us know what you think. So, till next time, catch you on the flip side.